Hey everyone, I hope you're having a good day so far. This is my presentation over the article I read on the impact of a congested competition schedule. And I'm Patricia Moore. So the article summary, the title was The Impact of a Congested Competition Schedule on Load Recovery and Well-Being in Under 16 Female Soccer Players in Comparison Between Starters and Non-Starters During a Development Tournament. The authors are Jamie Gonzalez Garcia and Blanca Romero Morlenda. The publication year was 2024, and the journal was the Applied Sciences Journal. So the article summary, the purpose of this article was to numerically demonstrate the impact of a busy athletic schedule, um, the impact it can have on an athlete's training load, recovery, and wellness, along with also comparing and contrasting the load of a starter versus a non-starter. So the methodology that was used, it was an observational study with data being collected over a 7-day period during a tournament. And during that tournament, there were 3 games played and 4 training sessions, one being a gym session, which there was no data collected on that session there. And again, over a 7-day period. So the people in this study were 18 female players on a U16 women's national soccer team with 3 central defenders, 4 fullbacks, 5 midfielders, 4 wingers, and 2 forwards. The goalies were intentionally left out of this study because of the differences in their exertion during a game and their training process. So data was collected for this study using GPS on all of the athletes. Right before the game started, they'd put the GPS on their back. Right after the game, they take the GPS off to assess the player's external load. So basically the physical load of the game. And then after each game, there and training session, there was questionnaires that they had to fill out using a Google form to find out the player's perceived exertion, recovery, and wellness. So during these questionnaires, the Borg's rate of perceived exertion, or RPE, was used to determine how the players felt um, during the game and during their training session. So the Likert scale was also used, ranging 1 from 10, to assess their recovery and wellness. So if you've never heard of the Borg rate of perceived exertion scale, this is basically it. 1 is a very light activity, 10 is max effort. So they were rating how they felt, how much effort and exertion they had to put in during games and training sessions, practice sessions during this 7-day period. So some of the key findings for this was that starters, external and internal loads were greater in games than it was in practices, which is expected, whereas the non-starters was consistently the same exertion levels during both games and practice, which I thought was surprising. Um, there was no significant decline in all of the players' well-being throughout the tournament, and this means that the coach did a good job using that periodization that we've been reading about, and the player rotation. So we'll talk about that in the next slide to help the players cope and recover when needed. The coach also did a good job of decreasing the training load before the game started by implementing different practice techniques, which again we'll talk about in the next slide. Overall, the starters' loads were higher than the non-starters, meaning that their rate of perceived effort was also higher. So some data that I thought was pretty interesting that I was referencing in the last slide was this chart here that is basically explaining how many minutes each player got in the entire week, which is pretty comparable to everybody, um, ranging from, 350 or I guess like two 250 to like 380. And so some data trends that I wanted to point out was that the players who started early on, I keep pointing to the screen, my mouse is better, I guess. So the players who started early did not always start at the end, and the players who played for like long periods of time in the beginning, that number decreases each time they play. And the training afterwards, so this player played 90 minutes during this session here, this game. They they only practiced for 25 minutes after that. And then the next game they only played 50 minutes. Um, and there was like a gym session here. So they practiced for 50 minutes, had a gym session, which could vary in intensity. I don't know, they didn't collect data on that. And then practiced for the 53 minutes, and everybody practiced for that. But what I thought was interesting was that this column here, where they practiced the following day after the game, changed based on how long they played for. So another example is down here. This player, everybody practiced for 58 minutes at the beginning. They did not start. And then they only played for 30 minutes. And then they practiced for 50 minutes. And then the next game, they did not start and only played for 26 minutes. But then the very last game, they started because they're probably the most recovered player out of the other people. And they played for 66 minutes, which is the longest time out of the two games that they played earlier. So I hope that kind of breakdown makes a little bit of sense. I thought it was interesting. The second thing that I thought was interesting, sorry about that. I had to pause because my dogs were being crazy. The second thing I wanted to point out with this data here is that the defensive players, I mean, you can see that this follows with every position, but I'm just using the defensive players as an example. So the defensive players on the team were rotated from like starters. So not every time the same person started, which is how I do it or how we do it on my middle school girls basketball team. So this player started every single time, but this number two player didn't start the first game, but started the second game, but then didn't start the next game. So they're kind of rotating through who starts, and it's different people each time. You can see in these columns that I've kind of highlighted out. So that rotation of players on who's starting each game, playing time differs as well. So like um, this player started and played for 90 minutes. Then they started again and only played for 50 minutes. And then they didn't start the last game and played for 46. So playing time differs, allowing for a little bit more recovery with that. And yeah, you can kind of see that throughout. So why does this matter to coaches who are focusing on long-term athletic development? Um, the adolescent years are a very high risk age for injuries due to their rapid growth at that time and physiological changes. So, keeping recovery in mind for these coaches are important so that players don't get injured, lose playing time, lose interest in the sport, and then ultimately fall out of the sport entirely, leading to a sedentary lifestyle instead of a lifelong active lifestyle. Secondly, knowing the different ways starters and non-starters are affected by a heavy schedule will help coaches with decision making. So, knowing that a starter is going to have a higher workload and need more recovery afterwards leads to the coach making that decision to change who starts each time and um, playing different people at different times. The last one is the recovery is essential to increase the well-being of players and avoid burnout. So if a player isn't well rested and well recovered before the next game or next training session, then their performance in the game might be affected. And then if their performance is continually affected, they're not going to have enjoyment out of that game or activity anymore, and that's going to lead to them not wanting to play it anymore. So these are all things that coaches who are following that long-term athletic development model might find important. The practical application for coaches. So, how could this research inform my coaching practice? I coach middle school girls basketball and high school cheer. The middle school girls basketball season is really fast, and short. So we play lots of games back to back. We practice almost every single time, like every single time we get a chance, we practice. And our practices are in the morning because it's a K-12 building. So we have the high school practicing in the evening. And so we have to practice in the morning, which leads to less sleep and more fatigue, and the season gets really tiring really quickly, especially for middle school girls. So the implementation of this for my middle school basketball girls is that I would want to do kind of the same thing that the coach of this soccer team did, where they switch out different starters for each game and rotating who starts when and not basing practice time on like just the same time period every single time, just basing it off of my players' recovery and how long they need to um, practice based on how physically exhausting the game was previous. For high school cheer, um, this season is very long and the the amount of games that they cheer at, especially for like basketball season, because they cheer for the girls and the boys. Um, so it's very long nights. It's a very long season. And so to implement this model or this research, the high school cheer team, I could just check in on the players more often to find out where they're at and how they're feeling, because sometimes it's hard to tell with girls um, how they're feeling and whether they're needing some recovery or a break or something like that. Because again, like I said, it is a very long season. And then also just planning ahead for practices and games and stuff for future parts of the season that get really busy. So like homecoming, court warming, the beginning of the year, transitioning from basketball season to football season, all of those can be really like busy and high stress. and pretty exhausting for the girls. We have court warming and homecoming routines that they have to practice and run through. And we call the week before that Hell Week because not only are we practicing cheers, we're also practicing the court warming, homecoming routines. We're worried about stunting. We've got all this other stuff that we're practicing and working on, and it becomes a lot for the girls as additionally to all of the games that we're cheering at as well. So the lead up to those busier times gets really exhausting, not only for me as a coach, but for me, for my athletes as well. So I think just planning ahead, maybe giving them a break or sections that they can kind of work on their own or practice at home or individually or in smaller groups outside of a practice time because again, our practices are in the morning because the gyms are being used for basketball season. Um, and then the track we like to practice on because that's where our games are at. But going back to just giving the girls a little bit of a break when needed because we don't really have an opportunity to rotate like starters. We don't have starters in cheer. So there's not really a player rotation we can go through. It's more of just making sure that they're managing everything and I as a coach are helping them manage everything um, during those busy times and doing the best I can to help them with the recovery process. So my discussion questions are the first one, compare the male and female athletes. Do you think a coach's implementation of the periodization would be different between the two genders during a congested competition schedule? The second one is how might you talk to parents or players who are upset about reduced minutes if you're rotating starters to protect their recovery and long-term performance? So that's kind of what I was talking about doing with my middle school basketball girls. And then finally, think back to when you were an athlete. Describe a time when your game/training schedule became congested, and how did your coach respond and adjust to support recovery between games and practices? So, were they implementing this periodization concept, or did you feel like tired and fatigued because of a congested practice and game schedule? So that is all I have for you. Here are my references, or here's my reference from the article that I read. And I used SlideGo for this presentation. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you thought it was informative, and I look forward to hearing your responses. Thanks. Bye.